Welcome back to Rewitched, a charmed 1998 rewatch journey. I'm your host, Jess Sabanko, and I can't wait to share my thoughts on one of my favorite shows with you. I'll be keeping these recaps spoiler-free and welcome fans new and old to join me on my journey here and on social media at Rewitched_pod on Instagram and TikTok. Currently, I'm on season 6. All right, so this week we're talking about season 6, episode 16, The Courtship of Wyatt's Father. So this has always been one of my favorite episodes in the entire series. I think it is such a strong episode, both dramatically and in terms of setting up what the rest of this season's storyline is. In terms of our innocents and villains of the week, so we have two innocents in a way. So we have Piper and Leo, and then we also have Chris, who's about to disappear forever. Our villains of the week are really the darklighter. We find out Gideon is also a villain in this episode. And then we do get kind of this antagonistic storyline with an angel of death once again, though I think that it's much more clear in this episode that he really is a good person. In terms of the sisters' individual storylines, so Phoebe and Paige in this episode start out very much on the track of trying to get Piper and Leo to hook up. And Paige is kind of like, oh, like we're trying to get two people laid. It shouldn't be this hard. And Phoebe's like, that is disgusting. We are trying to, romance them back together to make sure that our nephew is born. Please say it in a nicer way. And it's really funny the way Phoebe kind of like plays into that, whereas Paige is just like, this is what we're trying to do, right? And I really like that in terms of the different aspects of their personalities. We also see that Paige is brunette again, something of course the show had to call out because Piper's like, ever since Paige changed her hair, she's been acting really weird. I don't know, maybe she'll like change it back, which is really funny. And she does look really good, I like it. In terms of what they're doing, so this episode, we see that it was Wyatt's birthday party and they were kind of playing up all these things to try to get like Piper and Leo into the mood. And then Chris is like, oh, like, how's it going? And they're like, well, it's not going well. And he's like, well, if I'm not, made tonight, I'm not happening. So this is really bad. What do we do? Do we do like a love potion? And they're like, no, we can't do that. But then ultimately they decide that, you know what, we're willing to do it. And Paige is like, for one of my two favorite nephews. And so there's that whole setup of they're going to do that. But then of course there is a darklighter attack where the darklighter is very much playing. We find out later that they were hired to go after Leo and that they had to convince that they were also maybe after Wyatt, which of course when the darklighters show up, there's this big freak out because there are so many people with white lighter blood in the house. Once he is sent back and healed by the other darklighters, we get these little hints about what their plan are, how they're going to attack again. The sisters are scrying with his blood, specifically Phoebe, and they see the crystal doing this really weird thing it's never done before, which tells them there's probably multiple. So this is after they've made the decision that Piper, Leo, and Wyatt should all go to magic school as a happy little family, mostly because they want them to hook up still, but also to keep Wyatt safe. Wyatt stays there. The sisters and Leo do end up getting into this plan of going after the darklighters. Now, at magic school, Leo does have a conversation with Gideon where Leo is like, I gotta go back. And Gideon's like, no, like you're putting all the elders at risk. You actually need to stay up there and, let the sisters handle it. And he's like, you don't understand, like I'm a father, this is my family, all of that type of stuff. So he does go with them. It's very obviously a trap. There are tons of darklighters. Phoebe ends up getting hurt during the fight. And there is this whole thing of like the darklighters talking about how the sisters weren't supposed to be hurt. They're not after them. They're only after the elder and that they shouldn't be doing that. Of course, there was a trap set up so that when Piper blew up the darklighter, him and Leo would get sent to the ghostly plane. But because Piper was standing so close to the blast, she was also sent there with him. We then see in Piper and Leo's storyline that it's very much them still in kind of this place they've been in with their relationship where they're in this nice co-parenting mode. At the party, Leo's like talking to some of the other parents. There's this idea of setting up play dates. Wyatt has friends again, even though 2 episodes ago he was antisocial, so, plot's sake. But again, they have this big party, they have all this going on, and then it seems like, Leo's kind of torn between being an elder and being part of his family. So he, of course, wants to protect Piper, protect the sisters, so they go after the darklighters altogether, get sent to the ghostly plane. When they arrive there, Piper is very much looking for Phoebe. She's like, they'd go to the hospital if you weren't there. So they're trying to figure out how to get back to them, even though the streets are empty and they're kind of in this darker filter. We also see that then the sisters actually do go to the hospital, Phoebe and Paige. And Phoebe has a concussion, but like overall she's going to be fine. She had to get some stitches. She decides to check herself out. As they're about to leave the hospital, there's been this big accident between a bus and a truck, and there is a bus driver who flatlines. Prior to coming back to life, he goes to where Piper and Leo are, which allows Leo to figure out that they're on the ghostly plane. And then also when he comes back to, Phoebe and Paige hear him saying Leo's name and that he's an angel. And Phoebe also says that she was able to sense Piper and that she knows Piper's not dead because she would be able to tell. Which I don't know if that's Piper and Phoebe's specific connection as sisters or if it has something to do with her empathic power. So I am definitely interested to see if more things like that ever come up in the future in terms of her abilities or if it is, again, just that sister bond. Because Piper even brings it up when she's talking to Leo because he's like, oh, in order to be able to haunt people, because she's like, if we're in the ghostly plane, why can't we just fucking haunt them like any ghost? And he's like, that takes years to develop. Not any ghost can do that. You need to have a special connection. And she's like, oh, you mean like the bond of sisters? I know I can do it. And he's kind of like, yeah, you know what? Like, I don't question the power of three. Like, yeah, let's try. So they decide to go back to the manor, even though Leo is aware that that very much could be a trap. He's like, the darklighter has studied us. He knows that's where we would go. But Piper still thinks it's their best bet of getting in contact with the sisters. At the same time, Paige and Phoebe are coming to the realization of them being in the ghostly plane after going through the Book of Shadows and almost giving up. We also see them talking about giving up on Chris and Chris saying, you know what, like I was starting to be in the same place because at this point he starts turning translucent, things are going on, and he's like, you know what, maybe my destiny was just to come back and warn you guys about Wyatt, because Phoebe had kind of been going off on the spiel where Paige is like, what the fuck, no, and then Chris overhears it and she of course feels awful about that, but he's like, no, I've kind of been thinking the same thing. It's a really like emotional moment because I do feel for Chris because obviously he wants this not to happen to him, but also protecting his brother has become his life's mission. So it's really interesting to see kind of like him accepting his fate in that moment, but then not accepting it a little later on. But I really do enjoy the way that the sisters' obviously connection is building throughout this, where they are able to make that contact, which then, because Chris has become translucent, actually means him going back and forth between the two planes in order to pass along some communication. But of course, the Darklighters have made the plan to continue distracting the sisters, and so they show up, the fighting distracts them. Then, of course, we see that Piper and Leo there where like the other Darklighter is like a sniper and like shoots one through the window at Leo. It goes right through his shoulder and they do run off and get away. They decide to go back to the alley. They're like, we didn't even get to tell the sisters where to meet us though, because they're having this conversation because Leo's like, I have to save you. I have to get you back. And Piper's like, you mean get us back? Like, what the fuck? And he's like, come on, like, let's do this. She's like, well, it went right through you, so maybe it's not affecting you. And he's like, no, that just means it'll take longer. And then there is this whole like romantic conversation between them where we see that that connection between them is still very much there. And there's this idea that like their relationship has been all these ordeals that came up earlier in the episode. And Piper's like, oh, like you make it sound so romantic. And he's like, no, like we've been through so much worse than this. Like we'll figure it out. And now in this moment where he's dying, she's like, don't save me. Like she's getting really upset. She's like, I need to save you. Like doesn't want to give up on him. And then he says that he never stopped loving her. And they start making out. And we know that one thing led to another there, where the next morning they have this conversation that I actually want to read from because I actually love everything about it. Like this episode really sells what they are to me. Like I never loved them more than I did in these moments where you realize that the love they have for each other is just everything. And I really wish in my heart that someone would feel this way about me. Like I think that the way that their storyline is written in this episode is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen on television. So Leo says about last night, and Piper says, look, I don't have any regrets if that's where this is going. He says it's not, but I'm glad you said that because I don't either. I just want you to know that I don't have any expectations because I know everything that you went through when I became an elder, and it wouldn't be fair to put you through that again. And then he starts talking about how like neither of them actually wanted him to become an elder, and how like he stayed on Earth not just because he wanted to learn more about Chris or be there to protect Wyatt, but because he wanted to stay close to her. And the way that that's put her in danger and put Wyatt in danger, and how he can't do that anymore. How he has to make this decision, if he is to survive, to just focus on being an elder and really accepting that destiny that he did choose. And I like this moment because it's him, one, owning that he made a choice, and two, just admitting the fact that he didn't fully commit to it, right? He always stayed around, and part of that is not allowing Piper to move on. As much as like he's been, supportive of her living her own life, she was never fully gonna fall in love with someone else with Leo right there. And I think that this moment between the two of them just seals the fact that they do love each other. And even at the end of the episode, after they get back, because they are able to defeat the Darklighters, and then Leo has this final conversation with Gideon after he has fully accepted his destiny to be an elder and just stay up there, where he's like, sometimes I really wish that you guys had just said no and not let me and Piper get together. Look at all this pain. Look at what I've been through. And Gideon says that his love and his loss is what makes him so great, and that it shows the other elders what they're truly protecting, even though they don't experience something like that. And the idea that it's this sacrifice for the greater good, which we then learn how Gideon really feels about sacrifices a little later on, because we find out that he was willing to sacrifice Leo's life, and that he's willing to sacrifice the life of an innocent child for what he thinks is protecting the greater good. Because we do find out that Gideon was the one who hired the Darklighters to do this. That's why he didn't want to see the sisters hurt, right? Because the greater good is what seems to be most important to him. And he has this idea that Wyatt is too powerful. They never should have allowed this to happen. This much power in one person is dangerous to both good and evil. And so he has to put a stop to this in some way. And it makes me really curious about what his plans for Wyatt are and how this is going to go down throughout the rest of the season. I'm very excited to see where Gideon's character goes, because it's that whole idea of like, when you see good and evil as so black and white with no nuance, you're willing to do really evil things in order to protect what you think this like greater good or like perfect order is. And so I'm definitely interested to see where that storyline goes. Back to the whole Piper and Leo and the sisters aspect of it. So they are eventually all back at the alley. They figure out what to do. The sisters have figured out the portal after going to talk to Gideon. They do get Piper and Leo back. They're there with the Darklighter, and Phoebe's about to ask him, like, who hired you? Like, what is going on? Who helped you with this? But then the other Darklighter kills him. And we do have this moment of like, oh shit, like what's going on, before we get the big reveal that it was Gideon who set the whole thing up, which makes the fact that the sisters are trusting him and relying on him even more crazy and even more interesting to see where that storyline is going. In terms of Chris's disappearing storyline, so obviously he's running out of time in this episode. There's this cleaning person at the club, Clarence, who has these conversations with Chris about enjoying life, getting out there, experiencing things, telling him not to be so stuck in the future. He's like, I'm too old to worry about the future and you're too young. Like, you need to live your life. And then we later find out that he was actually an angel of death. He wanted to give Chris these opportunities to get to know him and trust him before he might have to disappear forever. And Chris, like, at first is fighting it. He's like, no, like, I still have time. I still have till the end of the night. Like, stay away from me. But then ultimately Chris does end up disappearing for a while. But then, of course, when they're back in the alley, they take out the Darklighters and leave with Leo. We see that Chris resurfaces and he's like, yes, I'm here. And then obviously everyone realizes, because they're like, oh my God, like, how did that happen? Chris has a nice conversation with Clarence when he shows back up, and he's like, wait, like, what are you doing here? So he's like, no, like, you're good. I just wanted to come and like wish you good luck. And then Chris asks why he said all that stuff about living his life, and he says, well, just in case I didn't have to take you. Because Chris is dedicating so much of himself to his brother and his family that he isn't living his life. And so I like that he got that little piece of advice, and I'm interested to see if he'll use any of it. We then, of course, have the final scene between the sisters where they're sitting in Piper's room. She comes in and she's kind of like, what's going on? And they're acting like really sketchy, don't really want to say it first. But then they're like, we know what happened between you and Leo last night. And she's like, what? Like, how the fuck would you know that? And then it comes out that Chris is their son, and Piper at first is like, no, like, I'm not pregnant. And then she's like, oh my God. And then Chris is standing in the doorway and they share this look with each other. And I love it. It really leaves me wanting to see like what's coming next. I think there's so much to look forward to going into the end of this season. And I think this episode did such a great job setting up for what all that is. And like I said, I think this episode is romantic. I think it's well paced. I think that all of the moments between the sisters are really fun. Yeah, I just loved it. But that is all I have for this one, and I hope you'll join me back next time.